Okay, thank you for coming out. This is meeting 7 of 7 of the San Joaquin County Cannabis Policy Project Public Workshop. So we've been doing this for a month now, I think, usually Mondays and Tuesdays. I don't know, other days we could throw in along the way. This is our last public outreach meeting, so I appreciate you coming out. This is what we're going to talk about. We're going to give you an overview of state laws and the ordinance as they currently exist in the county. We're going to talk about the different types of commercial cannabis businesses that are under state law as adopted in Prop 64. And then we're going to break down into four discussion groups. We're going to talk about commercial cultivation for about 20 minutes or so, retail and dispensary commercial business types, manufacturing, testing, distribution, and transportation, or what we call the logistic business types, and lastly, personal cannabis cultivation. So for starters, before we go any further, I'm Mark Miles. I'm the County Counsel for San Joaquin County, and I'm supposed to stand, okay, right about here. All right, and so I'm Mark Miles from San Joaquin County. I'm the County Counsel. With me is Zoe Merrill. She's a Deputy County Counsel in my office. We are assisted tonight by Greg and Robert from the County IS Department, providing the live feed on Facebook. So if you guys want to follow up on this, it'll be recorded and you can find it there. If you want to send the message out to all your friends who couldn't make it, hey, tune in on Facebook at the San Joaquin County Cannabis Policy Project Facebook page. It's there. They can participate as well. We are also assisted by Renee, Rosa, and Ryan, and they are going to help capture your comments. So who's got the microphones? Renee's got microphones, Ryan has microphones. And so when we get to the discussion part, they're going to bring the microphones around to you if you have a question. We really want you to use the microphone so that we make sure that we capture it on the recording. But then also Rosa is going to be capturing it here on the pads as well, so she'll write down your comments. And what we're going to do is we're going to consolidate all of that information and bring it back to the Board of Supervisors for a report, but we'll talk about that as we go along. All right, so workshop etiquette. This looks like a pretty rowdy bunch. I don't know, this side of the room. Raise your hand, we'll bring you a mic. Be courteous. What we really want is we really want your comments. We really want feedback that we can take to the Board of Supervisors. We really want this to be a discussion of ideas and not a discourse or argument about my side's right or my side's wrong or your side's wrong or whatever the case is. We really want respectful comments on topic. Okay? Feel free to ask any questions as we go along. Throw a hand up. We'll get back to you. All right, I said it's being recorded and streaming live on Facebook Live. We also have an additional way to capture your comments. We have a webpage, sjccannabis.org, and we've got a survey on that page. And so if you'd go to that webpage and fill out the survey, provide us your comments there as well, we would appreciate it. We also, and I think some of you guys already picked up the comment cards from the back when you came in. There's a box in the back, so fill those out on your way as you're sitting here and drop them in the box on the way out, and we appreciate that. If you didn't grab a comment card, there's some in the back. During the meeting, if we're going on and you're saying, God, this guy is long-winded, I need something to eat, there's something to eat in the back. There's some bottles of water back there. Help yourself. We really do want this to be a comfortable, engaging process. All right, so we started this on April 17th down in Tracy, and there's our schedule so far. Like I said, every Monday and Tuesday it seems like we've been out, and I can't remember the last place we were. But they've been great. We've had great participation with some smaller groups than this, some larger groups than this, but we've had really good participation. We only had one person who got angry and left the meeting. So I think that's pretty good. You know, only one person who got upset with us. We will finish this out, and then we're going to transition to we've got 3 meetings scheduled for industry professionals. They are the dispensary, retail, cultivation, and testing, transportation, distribution, manufacturing. Those are going to be held out at the Ag Center out on Earhart Avenue out by the airport. 6 o'clock on those dates. And those are for people who want to be in the industry or are in the industry or they're thinking about being in the industry. And we want to have a particular conversation with those people about what kind of regulations, the balance between regulation and allowing businesses to flourish. And so we really need input from those folks on what allows that business, what stifles it, what allows it to grow, what's the appropriate level of regulation. All right, so in 2015, the state legislature adopted the Medical Marijuana Regulation Act. That set out, most importantly for our purposes tonight, one of the things that it set out was a dual licensing scheme. It set out some regulations about where dispensaries and grows could be located, certain distances from schools and things like that. But it also gave a lot of control to the local agencies, the cities and the counties, to decide whether or not they were going to allow these types of businesses within their jurisdictions. Last year then, 2016, Prop 64 was passed, and Prop 64 said basically if you're 21 or over, you can use cannabis recreationally. Right? So you can possess up to 1 ounce, you can grow up to 6 plants and keep the byproduct from those 6 plants. And there's not a limit on that. But it did also follow the medical marijuana licensing structure. So it's still a dual license system. In order to get a state license, you will have to be able to get a license from your local, either city or county, depending on where the business is located. Some of the things that both under medical and adult use, there's no public consumption. There's no smoking or vaping where tobacco is prohibited. There's no possession or entry into a licensed facility by anyone under 21 years of age. No cultivation or business within 600 feet of a school or daycare. No smoking within 1,000 feet of a school except within a private residence if the odor can't be detected on school property. No possession on school or daycare property, no driving while intoxicated, no smoking in a vehicle, no unsecured outdoor cultivation, and no unsecured inventory. Going all the way back to 2008, in 2008, the Board of Supervisors adopted a prohibition or a ban against dispensaries in the unincorporated county. So let me stop right there for a second and clarify what it is that we're talking about and the report we're going to bring back to the Board of Supervisors. What we're reporting to the board on and what the board's going to decide is how commercial cannabis will be regulated in the unincorporated county. So it's not within the city limits of any of the 7 cities in the county. So not Ripon, Tracy, Lodi, Manteca, Escalon, or Stockton. They can do what they want, and whatever those city councils decide is what will occur within their city limits. The Board of Supervisors is only considering what's going to occur in the unincorporated, so outside of those city limits. So in 2008, as I was saying, the board adopted a prohibition against dispensaries. I was sitting with the board the afternoon that happened, and the discussion with the board at that time was not, we're against marijuana, or we're against medical marijuana. The discussion at that time was, some of the cities are going to allow this, and some of them are not. And for those cities that were not, specifically they were talking about Lodi, we don't want somebody to come into the county, be able to open up right on the borders of the city, and impose the externalities or the harms of that business on the city without the city having any control over it. So the Board of Supervisors said, we're just going to say no and let the cities do whatever it is that they want to do. And then that way, cities that want to opt in and partake of it, they can, and those that don't, they don't get it imposed upon them. And then 2 years ago, 2015, the Board of Supervisors adopted a prohibition on all indoor and outdoor medical marijuana cultivation at the prompting of the sheriff. So that's the groundwork, the laws that they exist both in the state and at the county level as of this year. So in February, the end of February 28th of this year, Ms. Merrill brought a report to the Board of Supervisors and provided them this information. Here's what the law says. What do you want us to do about it? Give us some direction. And what the board said was, well, we want you to do a couple things. First, we want you to take those existing ordinances and we want you to modify them so that they address all of the 19 different license types that are captured both under the medical side and the adult use side. And we're going to have a prohibition in place, but set a sunset date, include a sunset date of December 31st of this year. So on December 31st of this year, those ordinances will disappear. They'll no longer be effective. Okay? So we're in the process of doing that. We took the first one to the Board of Supervisors this morning for an introduction and waive reading of the ordinance. That's on the cultivation side. On the dispensary side, that went to the Planning Commission last Thursday night. Those were both approved. So the schedule now is to bring those back to the Board of Supervisors on May 23rd, and presumably the board, since they're compliant with their direction, will adopt both of them, but we'll see. The second thing the board told us to do was do this. Go out and engage the public. Find out what the public thought is, the public view is for the role of commercial cannabis in San Joaquin County, in the unincorporated county, and what kind of regulation, if any, should be imposed, and whether these businesses and these different business types should be allowed, if any, where. Bring that information back to us. They also said, we want you to get information on a couple things. We think that there are going to be impacts from these businesses whether we license them or not. So see if you can quantify what those costs are. And then also look at what are there some ability to generate revenue that offsets those costs. So we want you to look at both the social side, talk to the people, find out what they think, but then also dig into the financial side and the risks and benefits, impacts, and costs that may be imposed on the county, and bring us that information as well. And so that's why we're at meeting 7 of 7 right now. On the public outreach side is gathering that information from the social side. What are your views on these different license types? If you think they should be permitted in the county, where should they be permitted? Things like that. So the questions we're going to ask and the questions we're going to try and answer for the board is, what types of cannabis businesses should be allowed to operate in San Joaquin County? And that's what we want to hear from you. What's the best location for each type of cannabis business? How and when should these cannabis businesses be allowed to operate? And then lastly, should the county impose reasonable regulations on personal cultivation of cannabis? So here's a map illustrating the point. The board's talking about the unincorporated county, not what occurs within the cities. Reasonably regulate. The Board of Supervisors can always reasonably regulate land use in the traditional police powers of the elected agency. So those police powers are health, safety, and welfare. So they make a connection or a nexus establishing what are reasonable regulations to impose on these types of businesses, or alternatively, reasonable regulations because of health, safety, and welfare to impose on that personal cannabis grow that you may have. On the personal cultivation, the county cannot ban, but can adopt reasonable regulations governing the cultivation of the 6 plants. So the state law says you can grow 6 plants indoors in your home or residence or in an enclosed accessory structure. And the county can't prohibit that, but the county can put some regulations on. For instance, some of the things that have been talked about at previous meetings is, What about multifamily residential? What about apartment buildings? You know, not everybody is enamored with the odor from cannabis when it comes into bloom in September or October. Should the county treat cultivation in an apartment building different from cultivation in your private residence? Some people have said yes, some people have said no. We want to hear from you on those types of issues and those types of questions. Some of the things that are coming out, the state has just started issuing the regulations that will go along with the Adult Use Act and the Medical Marijuana Regulation Act. They started coming down a week and a half ago. Things that are already in state law are the distances from schools and daycares. The Board of Supervisors may decide a greater distance is appropriate, and we'll see if that happens. Health and safety and testing. We think that health and safety and testing of cannabis products is probably something that's best left to the state. And the rationale for that is this. If you're going to allow those businesses and you're going to set up a testing regime that says you have to test for certain products or byproducts from pesticides or fungus or whatever it is, it's better to have one testing protocol and not have one for each of the different 58 counties and one for each of the different 540 cities in the state, right? Because then your testing companies would never know which one they have to meet. So it's better probably for the state to set out those guidelines about this is what the testing should be to. Environmental protection, again, we think that that's a role for the state to say what the pesticides are going to be and how you're going to have to treat those. Worker protections and security. Security is something that I'm sure the Board of Supervisors will discuss and weigh in on. Some of the things that the board can do. The board can ban all of the commercial enterprises in all of the different zones. And so when we talk about the zones in the county, we're talking about residential zones, industrial zones, commercial zones, agricultural zones. The board can ban it in all of those zones. The board can allow it in all of those zones. So there's a full spectrum of what the board can do in approving these types of businesses. Right now I'm going to turn it over to Ms. Merrill, and she's going to talk you through the different commercial cannabis business types. Any questions so far?
Can I ask you what the other states have done? Is Colorado, for instance, at 21, are they all 21-year thresholds in the other states that have legalized it?
Yes, they are.
Okay, and do you know offhand what percentage of the jurisdictions in Colorado or Oregon or Washington have authorized different cannabis land uses?
I don't know what percentages have. I know that in Colorado, they have an opt-out system like has been adopted in California, and so some jurisdictions have said no.
I know that, yeah.
But I don't know what the percentages are.
Okay.
We'll look into that, though. That's a good question.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Yes, Supervisor.
As a suggestion, we have a pretty intimate group here. Maybe you want to talk with the people that are here and what their interest is about tonight's seminar. That way we can maybe tailor and answer some of their questions through the presentation. Oh, you're going to do that right now? Okay.
This is why you got elected. You're thinking like I am. I don't know if this is working. Tested all of them. No, that's exactly right. I do want to find out what people's interests are, because when we get into the commercial businesses, oh, perfect. We have had so many workshops now. The first ones are really, let's find out what people are interested in. And what we've had is we've had different levels of expertise on cannabis. So I just want to make a few preliminary remarks. Then we're going to do exactly as the supervisor suggested. And then we're going to get into commercial cannabis businesses. And this is the fun part where we get to go back and forth. And we're going to get a lot of questions. We're going to get a lot of discussion. One thing I want to note is that we keep being really excited that it's meeting 7 of 7, but it's not the end of the public being able to comment on the commercial cannabis policy project or the cannabis policy project. So in fact, you will continue to be able to make comments, to add input, and that's done through the website, through our Facebook page, the Twitter page. Is it a Twitter page? Twitter feed, I guess is the appropriate term. And we want those comments to keep coming in. So people who are viewing it on Facebook or viewing it on other realms, Twitter, whatnot, we do want you to continue to add those comments. So if you guys go back and are talking to people who say, well, I wish I could have gone to a workshop. Well, you know what? You can still add your comments. You can still give us input. You can still reach out and make sure we are hearing your voice and hearing what's important to you. So again, before we get started, I know we've got some people from, we have 2 planning commissioners, but one of those is a master gardener. So I'm hoping you're going to give us some input on some of that expertise. And so probably not. Okay. All right. So let's hear from these side. If I can have Renee and Ryan bring some mics over here. Rosa, Renee, and Ryan are helping us. They are part of the team. Get it? Because they're all ours. So what are you guys interested in hearing tonight? What brought you out?
Pretty much we're looking to maybe possibly looking to open a dispensary or even grow. We were told there was a map, that we might want to look at and gather a bunch of information through you guys.
Great, okay.
To kind of continue forward with what we want to do.
Are you currently operating in the area? And I don't mean to, if you don't want to answer, you don't have to, but I'm curious because some people are operating outside the area or in.
We're not.
Not yet. Okay,
Not
but
yet.
interested.
We are.
Great. Okay. Are you all connected?
Yeah, we're all the
Okay,
same here.
great. All 4.
Yes, correct.
Well, that was easy. Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay. So what's interesting about tonight is that we will have some maps. The maps in this program, this is a PowerPoint that will be posted on the website where you can go. You'll go to our website, which is sjccannabis.org. Go to the workshops, and where you see the May 9th workshop, this exact PowerPoint will be posted. But that PowerPoint for this district is district specific. So we're going to have district specific maps here. But if you want county maps, those are also available on the website, or you specifically have a question you want to address sort of in terms of where the ag zones are. There are other PowerPoints for each district, or you can certainly submit that to the email and we'll get right back to you because we are trying to engage people. So to the extent you have a question that says this is what I'm interested in and I can't really effectively comment, we'll get you that information. All right. So tonight, as we're discussing that, obviously we're going to focus a lot on cultivation and dispensaries anyway, and then on the logistics, because it's an industry you're interested in. I'd love to get that feedback on how you think that product movement would possibly impact the business you're thinking about starting. All right. So like Mark said, the state laws are what's driving the county's question. Both on the medical side and the adult use side, the 2015, the MCRSA, and the 2016 ALMA expanded what types of marijuana or cannabis are legal. So until this, marijuana was illicit and it was treated as a law enforcement issue. Now it's legal, and so it is being questioned in the form of local control and as really a land use issue, a business issue. So when the state came down on the medical side, that MCRSA, the medical license types created, you can see on the left types 1 through 12 with a number of subcategories, which resulted in 19 license types. 2017, the adult use, the recreational license scheme mirrors the medical, but it's not identical. There are some differences that really ultimately, when we get down into policy, will make a difference. I don't think they make a difference for tonight's discussion on what we want to bring forward to the board, but you should be aware of those. So as you look at the green license types at the top, a business type for cultivation, both on the medical and the adult use side, you can see there's 1A, 1B. Each of those license types, which would require local approval, are types of cultivation. Tonight, instead of dealing with all of those subtypes, what we're going to do is we're going to look at cultivation as indoor, outdoor, and mixed light. And so we're going to get into that because, as you can see, this is pretty complicated, and from a regulatory standpoint, I will tell you this is a very complicated scheme. The next way we're going to break down this complicated license type structure is to look at the kind of yellow, the dispensaries and retailers. Those are the stores. You mentioned that that's something you're interested in. These are essentially the store to sell cannabis products, both for the medical market and the recreational market. So we're going to deal with that as a discussion point, as a type of business we're going to talk about. And then third, third, we're going to look at the pink types. These are types of businesses that we call the logistic license types. They are how the product is going to get tested, moved around, ultimately distributed to the end user. All right, so let's go ahead and get started. So again, medical has 17, I think maybe I misspoke, adult has 19. The adult use, one of the differences between the medical and the adult use is an expanded micro business, and that's sort of an interesting license type, so we're getting a lot of interest in, and that's where you can do multiple license types within one approval. So that'll be interesting to see how that develops. So now what I want you to look at, because what we want to do is make sure we're talking about this all on the same page. Under state law, again, a dual license structure, so there will be local approval required. This is how the product theoretically moves around in the marketplace. Whether this marketplace is in one city, one county, or ultimately over a region, that product is going to start at the cultivator. That could start with a nursery license type, be grown from seed at the nursery, then transferred to a cultivation license type holder or cultivation business. It will then move by green blob, those are trucks, to the next type. So if it's a straight product, it's going to go to the distributor for either first testing and then ultimately to the dispensary, or to the manufacturer where that ag product will be converted, extracted, and then converted into an edible, packaged, delivered to the distributor, and ultimately to that end user. So we'll be talking a lot about product movement, so we wanted you to have a visual of it. Okay, so first we're going to talk about cannabis cultivation. This is the most complicated, and I think what impacts the most people, and potentially is one of the most difficult questions that the board will face. Like I showed you, there are a number of different actual state license types, but when we talk about it, what we want to think about and we want to sort of get a gauge of is whether citizens and stakeholders see cultivation either indoor, outdoor, or in a mixed light as being something we want in our community. Mixed light is greenhouses or those hoop structures, and you guys are probably familiar with that, but again, that way we're on the same page when we're talking about it. So as Mark said, state law has come up with some pretty specific details. One of the rules already laid out and that's fleshed out a little bit in the regulations are that no cannabis business, including a cultivator, can be located within 600 feet or 1,000 feet for some activities of a school site. So in District 3, these are the school sites, and so there can be no cannabis businesses around those little yellow blobs. Okay, so again, you have a visual, a map of District 3, where the school sites are and where those cannabis businesses cannot be located. And like I said, each workshop for each district will have the same map for that district. So if you went to the District 4 PowerPoint, the District 2, you're going to see comparable maps. So I think that's important if you're looking at different areas in the county. All right. When we talk about this, we're looking at the question of where, right? Mark laid out that a lot of jurisdictions, and anytime a jurisdiction is asking the question of, is this compatible? Where should this go? We are looking at maybe because it's an ag product, the state law identifies it as an agricultural product. It grows out of the ground. And so therefore you may think an appropriate place for this is the agricultural zone. It grows like corn, let's put it in the ag. In District 3, these are the parcels with agricultural zoning. So obviously the majority of District 3 is ag. The next question is, if it's not appropriate for ag, or some people think it may threaten the existing ag community, existing ag economics, would we be displacing food? If we placed it in the ag, would we be hurting the wine industry if we placed it in ag? And so some people have advised us to consider other locations. So another location would be in commercials. So if you would have like a hydroponics store, could actually be located in a strip mall or commercial area. These are the District 3 parcels with commercial zoning. So you have a lot less options in District 3 for commercial zoning. The next question is, if it's indoor and you're looking at a large-scale cultivation, then potentially you're looking at industrial zoning. So that's something that would be where warehouses are located. It's really moved away from residential, so any noise, odor isn't going to impact. These are the industrial zones in District 3. So when we're asking, and pretty soon comes the discussion part, so get ready. our question is, of course, should we have this in San Joaquin County? That's the question that the board has asked the public to address and asked us to gather input on and ultimately bring back to them. Whenever we're asking the question of, do you think this should be in your community, or is this a business type that we should allow? These are the things that we have been asking people and are asking you guys tonight to consider. Now, obviously, if you're considering doing a business, then what you maybe want to give us input on is how a business that you're considering could minimize these impacts, or alternatively address people who are concerned with these items. So odor, clearly with marijuana, cannabis, there's potentially an odor depending on which part of the product movement you're in. Security, we get that question a lot, and so any type of cannabis business, we are going to need to address to the board and inform the board on what those security concerns are, and are there any ways to mitigate it? Is the industry telling us, look, here's an option, a solution for mitigating those security concerns? Water use, always key in the valley. Energy use, that's sometimes the question between indoor. Thanks, Renee. People are always trying to quiet me down. I've heard that I talk too much. Okay, so the next one is building code and safety issues. Now, clearly any type of business has to abide by existing building codes and laws. That goes without question. What is a question is potentially, are there additional codes or safety issues that need to be addressed in policy? Is the industry telling us this is a unique situation that we have in cultivation facilities, and here's how we solved it in another jurisdiction? Costs, always a key both to the operator as well as the approving entity. Available locations, that gets us back to that ag, commercial, industrial, what is the appropriate place? Buffer zones, mainly that's dealt with by the state, but as Mark raised the question, the state just set the minimum. Is there value to increasing that buffer? County fees, obviously if there are impacts or processing costs to the entity, can we recover those costs or cover those costs by looking at fees for inspections and permits? And finally, enforcement. Any rule that we put into place, any policy, is only as good as the enforcement. And we have seen that both benefit the business owner as well as the county, and so we want to make sure that we've got the right regulation in place and that we've got sufficient ability to enforce it. All right, so again, we're thinking about the threshold question of whether we should allow cultivation businesses in the unincorporated county, and if so, then maybe where. Those are some locational options. Any questions on cultivation, and then we're going to get to the discussion. You guys are obviously pretty familiar with the state law, so any questions as far as how the process is going in the county? No. Oh. No.
We were just briefed by a lawyer and spent some time there, and he kind of explained the law that caught us up to speed.
Okay, great.
Just moments ago.
Okay, perfect. Okay, so then what we want to do is we want to move on to discussion. So I'm just going to frame the discussion, and then we're going to open it up, because it sounds like not only have you been informed, so you maybe have thought of some things, so we are going to pick your brain. Again, we've got the threshold question. That's why we started the policy project at all, is should we allow the cannabis businesses, commercial cannabis cultivation specifically in the unincorporated area? That's the big question. And then these are secondary questions of if yes, then what should that look like? Should it look like outdoor? Should it look like corn? Should it look like indoor in a warehouse? Or should it be that mixed light somewhere in the middle? And then there's an additional question of nurseries. That has much less impact than a large-scale operator, but it may be a license type that we could look at with minimum impact. And then the question, and this will be really interesting to hear from you guys, is if we're looking at cultivation, should we be treating on a policy level medical and adult use differently or separately? So we're going to get Renee and Ryan here with the mics. So I'm going to go ahead and open it up. Let's see, what's your feedback on cultivation? You mentioned dispensary first, but obviously if you're looking at dispensary, are you looking at cultivating, and where would you get your product if you weren't looking at cultivating? So what are your thoughts on cultivation? And yes is not going to cut it.
Yeah.
Nice try.
I mean, I believe it should, location is important, and I think location is important, but I think kind of all of them should be allowed. You know, some licenses for outdoor, some for indoor, and some for the mixed light.
Okay.
A little bit of everything.
Do you see any one of those three types, and you guys are not off the hook, you have to talk to, do you, of those three types of indoor, outdoor, and mixed light, do you see any concerns with any of those three? Security maybe more so with one type than the other?
I mean, yeah, of course there's issues with all of it, security being probably one of the main ones. Yeah, there's definitely an issue with security.
Is there more issue with it being outdoor or more issue with it being indoor?
I'm going to go ahead and say probably both.
Okay, and I'm not quizzing you, I'm just interested in your thoughts.
No, I would say both, probably.
Okay.
I mean, there's, yeah, people will steal either way or try to.
Who do you think, should the county regulate how we mitigate those concerns, or do you think the business owners are going to take that on as part of their business model, and that's part of the cost of doing business? What are your thoughts there? How do you plan on laying out in your business plan how you're going to mitigate the concerns?
I think they've already started to kind of do it themselves, and I'm sure it's just maybe a matter of beefing up protection. I'm sure it's going to fall on the dispensary or the grower.
Okay, and should we, as a jurisdiction, do we think that keeps our citizens safe enough to say, you're going to protect your product, or should we set a minimum security? What are your, I mean, it's hard to know, right?
That one. Yeah, I haven't. Yeah.
Okay, you have homework.
I'm not coming to class next time.
Fair enough.
All right.
So what are your guys' thoughts? Because I know you guys are in the same project maybe, but maybe have thought about it in different ways.
I mean, just like any business, you protect your own. You have your own protection. I mean, if you need law enforcement, you make a phone call. And I mean, just like any business or corporation, it's the same thing you'd be running.
So like a jewelry store has a high value product.
Correct.
And do we set security? Do you see that as being analogous?
Yes, of
Okay.
course. I mean, it's more of a risk and it's more money that someone could steal and more someone would go for it. But just in any business, I think it's the same idea.
Okay, so you're taking the risk.
Yes.
Do you think it's different? So if somebody goes and steals jewelry from a jewelry store and they sell it on the black market, somebody just has a pretty necklace. I mean, I dated a guy in college, pretty sure the ring, who knows where that came from. But is it different that it's a drug? If they're selling it on the black market, is that different than the jewelry store?
No.
Okay.
It's a product. It's a product just as anything else is.
Okay. Now, interesting, because you said this business can now call
Unless
the police.
it's being sold to minors and kids,
Okay.
That.
Is that now a law enforcement issue and not a regulation issue? Is that how you look at it?
Just like alcohol. I mean, some kind of weird. Yes. I mean, it's like just alcohol. I would say you'd want to treat it just like alcohol.
Meaning
Or similar.
if it's sold at a liquor store and somebody breaks in and then sells that six-pack, that's a crime.
Definitely.
Interesting. Okay. Okay, so do you think if you guys are opening up a cultivation business, is it fair to tax you, to have you pay an extra application fee to cover the costs? Because now we're going to potentially increase in use of law enforcement. Do you think that's a fair way to address those costs, those increased law enforcement costs?
Maybe you have to compare that to what other businesses pay, or if they're taxed. But definitely keep it fair within other businesses around.
Okay, but again, if we sell the jewelry, there's a crime at the stealing moment, but we don't have drugs on the street. Do you think that causes an increased cost to us?
Say that again?
So I think so you're saying keep it fair between the jewelry store and the cannabis business?
Correct.
Okay, so really look at what it costs.
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, just compare it to other costs from other businesses.
Okay.
And just,
So what about you two? I'm quizzing these guys in the front. They thought they sat in the back and they were going to get away with this. I'm curious about your thoughts on the cultivation business.
I'm thinking like the footage away from the school and stuff. That's a really big issue.
Okay.
Keep it away from children and stuff like that. Is a big issue. You don't want kids to be around when there's that kind of stuff going on. Basically.
So your thought is really the locational criteria is going to help us
Yes.
mitigate the negative impacts.
Yes.
Okay.
And to cultivate, if you're doing outdoor, you would probably want to, put like a fence or something where people can't see it instead of being just out in the open.
Okay, so maybe a fence.
Yeah.
So that's going to maybe stop people from
Yeah.
seeing it and coming to
maybe
steal it?
have like some kind of odor control that you can put in to like take the less odor away
Okay.
versus making it like not do nothing about it to let the whole place smell up,
And is that for indoor or outdoor?
for both.
Okay.
Yeah.
So neighbors aren't being as
Yes,
affected?
yes.
Have you looked into this? You guys are developing a business. Have you looked into some options for odor control?
There's a lot of options out there. Like if you're doing a greenhouse, you can always put like a carbon filter or something in there to take away the smell.
Okay.
Yeah.
And you see that being valuable both indoor, it sounds like mixed light,
Yes,
and
yes.
outdoor?
For all of the things above, yes.
Interesting, because we haven't really had that feedback. So I appreciate that as somebody who's thinking about a business. That may be one way to address both the security and maybe the odor.
Yes.
Okay. How about the question, because we haven't even made it through the list yet. What about the question on a cultivation business, should we be treating medical and recreational or adult use differently? I know the quiz just gets harder and harder, right? It's a tough question. That's why we've had 7 meetings on this topic. Any thoughts? I mean, for you guys, when you considered going into the business, did you consider that now the adult use market is open and therefore it's a much bigger market? Or did you see the existing medical and think maybe that's why we should start a business? How did you look at the two systems as somebody considering going into the business?
It's more from what you hear. It's more what you hear from what other states are doing, and you hear rumors kind of thing. So that's kind of what I'm going to base all my answers on, is rumors.
Fair enough. We'll take it.
Yeah, they're all rumors.
We have experts to give us the numbers. We want to know what you guys are hearing, feeling, seeing, thinking. So fair enough.
It just sounds like from other places, like medical seems to be a little easier to operate without having to jump through so many like loopholes. Maybe fight for a limited amount of licenses, like 4 or 8, whatever it is that they're giving out here. And it's a lot of stuff like that I've heard.
Okay. The medical industry is certainly much older, and so it's a little bit more established. You raised a really interesting question. You said medical, you may not be fighting for the number of licenses. So as far as you understand it, most jurisdictions are doing limited numbers of licenses?
From what I understand.
Okay. How do you feel about that?
I think it should be open to maybe not unlimited, but definitely not something with a place like Stockton with a population like how it is, when you just go with 8 licenses, say, that's not much for...
It's really limited. Do you feel like
is.
maybe you could do a better job than someone who has the license type and you're not going to get a shot?
Exactly. There's politics and stuff that are obviously involved. And, when it comes down to it, if there's only 8 licenses and a few are already taken, there's a fight for it. And I'm sure there's ways that they kind of freeze people out that aren't, as active in politics,
Okay.
or as active in these meetings and stuff. Yeah.
So freezing people out, that's an interesting question.
Definitely.
And maybe those weren't given out based on who's the best operator. They were based on politics, it sounds like
Definitely.
your view is.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. No, that's really interesting feedback, because remember, we have to do a few things. We have to report to the board on, first, the threshold, whether the community is saying we should have cannabis businesses. And remember, some people say no and some people say yes. And if they say yes, then we have that next question of not only where, but then how. And you raised that application question, so that idea of limited licenses, and you feel that creates a barrier to entry. So even though you guys may have talked to your lawyer and you may have the best business model, you feel like you might have missed out on those 6 or 8, you're referring to Stockton, even though you might ultimately be the operator who's dealing with odor and dealing with security. Interesting. So that's really important input for us to get, so I appreciate that.
Of course.
And on the medical and the adult, do you really see one as being something we should consider as more valuable in our community? Because remember, we're asking whether we should allow this type of business in our community, where we live, where our kids go to school. Do you think there's a different value to a medical cultivator versus an adult use cultivator, or do you think they're both legal? Let's look at them the same way. We're curious about that question.
I think both legal. Yeah, I think I could speak for the 4 of us.
Okay. Okay. whiskey at one point was both recreational and medicinal. Times have changed, but at some point, so maybe we're looking at something like that. Okay, I really appreciate you letting me quiz you on cultivation. So just wait till we get to dispensary. There's more. All right, so really appreciate that input, you guys. Now retail and dispensary. So this is what you actually mentioned first, is something that you're interested in maybe starting. Now, keeping in mind that this is the license type as defined under the state. And again, I know you are pretty familiar, so we'll get through this pretty quickly. But on the retail license type, the store, this is the end user for that, or this is where the end user comes, right? This is the public place where the medical patient comes, or the recreational interested party comes in order to buy the product. And because we retain local control on the county level, the County Board of Supervisors can ultimately decide whether to allow this type of business or prohibit. And if they decide to allow this type of business, they can then go one step further and say, either we recommend that we allow mobile delivery from that physical dispensary site, or alternatively, we prohibit mobile delivery from that dispensary site. And again, if they say, yes, we want this type of business, or yes, we're going to allow it, they also then have to answer the question whether they're going to allow on-site consumption of cannabis, or they're not going to allow on-site consumption of cannabis. So they have a really big job. So when we look at where a store goes in District 3, a dispensary is really a commercial operation, and so we are looking at commercial zoning. However, I want to raise the issue because this is, you guys are talking about maybe going into this business, so I definitely want to address this with you guys. There has been a lot of discussion at these workshops and in other jurisdictions, so both within the state and other states, about co-location. So is there a value to having maybe all of the business types in a business park? So something like the business parks where you've got, in Tracy, you've got business parks of different types of business, and they're all there. Or like the Ghirardelli Logistics Center right off of I-5, right where it goes to 120, and there's a store that's attached to that logistics center. So even though that's clearly an industrial space and an industrial area, there is a public store right on the front there. They have really good hot fudge sundaes with extra whipped cream if you are interested, which I am often interested when I am driving by that location. And so although we are identifying commercial zoning here in the PowerPoint, I think we are also open to discussions of, do you think there's a value in co-locating maybe with an indoor facility or some other facility, and then that would be in industrial or something like that. So definitely keep that open. Again, we've got the community considerations for a dispensary. We see a lot less odor concern, but it certainly exists, especially if you've got on-site consumption. But we do see, compared to cultivation, maybe an increased security concern, because you do have members of the public coming in. We know under the dispensary model, we have seen some crime created because people came in and with cash, ready to purchase cannabis, and that was sometimes a target. And we've got a pretty high density of product that's already packaged and ready to go. So that's potentially kind of like the jewelry store, a high value target. We've got less water and energy use questions, but we always ask that when we're thinking about whether we want it in our community. Building code and safety issues. Are there any special building code and safety issues for a dispensary? That's a question for you to consider. Cost, location, buffer zones. That school buffer zone clearly already in place from the state. Do we need an increase? And then fees, covering enforcement and compliance, and then enforcement. Any questions on dispensaries before we get to the discussion? Love this thing. All right, so here's the discussion on dispensaries, and I'm really interested in this, and I do plan on quizzing you. So how do you feel about permitting commercial retail businesses in the county? Again, that's the threshold question, right? Should we? And then if we do, this is difficult because the state law has two different systems, and in fact has different testing protocols, mark reference protocols, different ones for each county and city, but in fact, the state's two systems have different testing protocols. So that medical marijuana, medical cannabis under state law testing guidelines is actually, has a different amount of residue. It is a medical grade of cannabis, and adult use, you get a few more pesticides with your hash. So that's just how it works. And so the question is, when we consider this question, should we be considering them differently or separately? So let's get everybody the mic. How do you feel about dispensaries in San Joaquin County, in the unincorporated area, and certainly in District 3? Again, yes is not enough.
I believe they should be
Like,
allowed.
yes.
I believe they
You
should
had
be
me at
allowed.
dispensary. Okay, you think they should be allowed?
Correct.
Okay. Should they be allowed everywhere, or should we have locational criteria?
Of course, locational criteria for maybe this, I guess it depends how many licenses are given out.
What if we're not, and I don't know what the board will ultimately do, but what I would love to do for discussion purposes is not think of it in a model where we're limiting the number. So if you could have an ideal world where you see this as working best both for your business could thrive, but also we're able to regulate and meet the health and safety concerns that we're obligated to meet. How do you see this happening? So don't think about a limited number of license types maybe, but think about what's good policy here and that works for your business.
I mean, having it in unincorporated areas is a good idea,
Okay.
being that it's out of the way. But then again, you're going to have the cities kind of allow it or not allow it and just leave it up to individual cities for sure.
Okay,
But,
and that is definitely true. We have to do that by state law. So good point.
Yeah.
Those cities can still do what they want. So Stockton may have 8 or 5, Lathrop might have 2, and so, but you're saying in the unincorporated, you want to see them. Do you want to allow them anywhere?
of course, not next to, I think they're already set up, the school and all that. But
Okay.
yeah, I mean, anywhere.
Okay.
As of right now, anywhere.
Okay, do you think they pose particular difficulties or concerns for, under the general plan, they would really be limited to commercial. You couldn't have them in a residential, but what you're saying is they don't need special locational considerations. But do they actually raise special considerations if they were right next door to the Elks Lodge? Do you think it creates any security concerns or public concerns?
What do they do for alcohol now when you fill out for a license? You kind of apply first and you post it up and you see if you have any feedback, any complaints, anything like that. Maybe run a similar system, I'm sure, is what's going to be placed maybe.
That's an interesting, so your thought is that if we address it similar to alcohol, then they've sort of already covered some of those concerns by having some limits to schools, their commercial operations, but mirroring maybe the alcohol, the way that the alcohol license is considered.
Correct.
Okay, interesting, because it has some of similar impacts, you think?
Lots of similar impacts, yes.
Okay, great. You guys? Yeah, see, again, they thought you were going to, nope, you're not getting out of it. Especially because you have on flip-flops and I have heels, so you're going to, it's not fair. So what are your thoughts on dispensaries in the unincorporated county?
I agree. Just like any liquor stores, cannabis is they're not drinking and driving. I mean, alcohol is a lot more danger risk. I mean, I don't see cannabis as a huge risk of that.
Okay,
I don't
so
see too many people getting stoned and going and crashing cars and robbing people, and I mean.
So there are a lot of people who say in Colorado there was an increase in impaired driving. And in fact, there was a negative impact on safety because there was impaired driving. And we have difficulties testing for that.
Yes.
So without a good test to test for that, do you think that that's maybe an issue that's going under the radar because we're not able to test for it as easily? And so even though there was a car crash that was caused by somebody who had just gotten high, maybe that didn't get tracked.
I agree, but what are they doing right now to enforce that?
So the state, under MCRSA, the medical scheme, did fund a study at UC San Diego. And you'll be surprised to hear this, students volunteered to smoke copious amounts of cannabis. I'm pretty sure everyone in my dorm was in that study. And in that study, what they are doing is they are testing both ways to measure impairment, and they are also attempting to develop a test like a breathalyzer. But those study findings are not out. And so we don't actually have a good way to measure that. So how do you feel about us approving something that may cause an increase in impaired driving and no ability to measure and then ultimately punish people for that? What are your thoughts?
I think they need to find out a way to measure how much cannabis has been consumed, and just like alcohol, like under 0.08, how much they've induced and smoked. They need to make a regulation about that.
So the state licenses come down in January. Should we hold off on approving businesses until we have that test?
No, I do not.
No, you don't think so?
No.
So is it worth do you see it as being worth the risk, or a risk you're willing to take because it's been legalized at the state level? What are your thoughts?
I don't think that's going to be a huge risk level.
Okay. Oh, interesting. Okay, so you don't think it's maybe a mismeasurement. You think it's actually not really causing those accidents. It's different than alcohol.
Correct.
Okay. And I don't want to put words in your mouth, but I'm also trying, see, poor Rosa has to take notes. So she has to hear you, and then I try and give her like buffer time to write down what you're saying. So just so you know how the magic is happening, that's how the magic's happening. Okay. So, but you don't see it as a high enough risk to delay implementation of licensing?
No, I do not.
Okay. Okay. No, and that's fair. I'm not judging your statement. It's just a really difficult topic, right? And with alcohol, you measured over a 0.08. It's a very clear threshold. And so once Colorado was coming out with some of those numbers, it really made it difficult for projects like ours or jurisdictions to figure out how to look at that. And so we're really trying to get the public's input on what their thoughts are, because they're out driving those roads with their kids and their families, and so we want to make sure that that question is being posed.
Absolutely.
So what are your guys' thoughts on dispensaries, retail, locational criteria, some of those community considerations? Are there security concerns? Should they be allowed to smoke or vape on site or consume on site? Renee's bringing you the mic. He tried to just nod his head.
Yeah, I don't think it's safe to have them consume on site, because after that they're leaving and they're high and they're not supposed to be driving down the street. So I don't think it's safe. Maybe at home, in your residential area.
Okay.
Like that. Yeah.
So that's interesting, because your thought about on-site consumption is different than a bar.
Yes.
Okay. Interesting.
And it depends too. It's cannabis. If you're a user for 5 years versus a user for 3 months is a big different impact on the person versus someone that has been smoking and someone that hasn't been doing it. So it affects everyone differently.
I see. So potentially, like a medical user who's been using for a long time has built up a tolerance.
Yes.
So they may be able to smoke a different amount and be impaired in a different way.
Yes.
So that's an interesting question, especially when it comes to the idea of a breathalyzer, because with alcohol, people also gain a tolerance. So they might still be a good driver, but they would still have that amount in their system. So ultimately, we'll have to wait and see what the state comes down with as far as regulations. Yes. But your thought on on-site consumption is that we shouldn't have it because it means people are walking out of those doors impaired.
Yes.
Interesting. Okay. So what do you think about medical versus adult?
I think it's a little different. I think that it should be a little different, because for medical, people have been using it for a while now, and they need it for medical reasons. And for the other businesses, like for recreational, when they want to, and it's different. They don't need it as much as the medical patients.
So do you see potentially, so if you lived here in District 3, and the board said, you know what, we want to approve medical dispensaries but not adult use, would you think that would be a fair thing, or would you like to see both adult and medical? Because even though you're saying, we sort of value the medical, it's medicine,
yes.
Do you think both should be allowed in District 3, or do you think only medical?
Both.
And anyone
allowed,
can answer.
But different rules, maybe different, like a little bit different for each patient.
Okay.
For the patient or for the regular user.
Okay. And there will be different points of sale because they'll be taxed differently under state law, but interesting. Okay. So they should both be available, but you do seem to value the medical a little bit more.
Yes.
Okay.
Yeah. Because certain patients do really need it versus someone that just, want to try it out.
Right. Yes. The difference between being able to get codeine because you have, pneumonia, versus getting that bottle of wine or Schlitz malt liquor, whatever. Okay. Not that that's what I buy. You guys are learning a lot about my habits. All right. Any other thoughts on dispensary and retail? Kitty? All right. So I really appreciate and again, I appreciate you letting me quiz you, because these are, we talk about this all the time, but the team on the policy project, we've all talked about it over and over and over again, and we're looking at it really from a different standpoint. So when we get the public in here, we really want to get some of those questions answered. All right, so these are the next type. Now I know that you said you're not necessarily interested or considering at this point a business model utilizing manufacturing, testing, distribution, or transport in perfect. And so you came in with this idea of dispensary and maybe cultivation, but these are still license types that would affect any business. And so I'm really interested in what your thoughts are, especially because they're going to affect how the product that either you're getting or that you're growing is moved through our market. So manufacturing is the first logistic license type we're going to talk about. And so what we're going to do is get through these pretty quickly, because although the system in general is complicated, manufacturing is manufacturing. So we'll get through the license types, and we'll ask you if you have any questions after each one. And then we're going to talk about the 4 logistic license types together, because that's how we want to gather input, and that's how we're going to convey it to the board. But jump in with any questions as we go through these. The manufacturing license type is defined by the state as the business that prepares cannabis for commercial sale, including but not limited to, that's super lawyery words, including but not limited to drying, cleaning, curing, packaging, and extraction. This is really the key one for product movement and the key one for dispensaries. What this business is going to be doing under state law, extracting the active ingredient of cannabis in order to create cannabis-related products, including edibles and concentrates. So again, because that's a huge part of the dispensary market, that retail market, this is a key license type, a key business type that would also have to have that dual approval. And this is a type of business that is actually identified by state law as being of 2 levels. So remember, we've got an ag product being grown at a cultivation site. There will be some processing there on site with the cultivator, by the cultivator. That would then have to be transported by transport in such a way to not have that ag product spoil. So we can think about almond milk, almonds going then to the processor where almond milk is created or processed. And so once it gets to the manufacturing, they're either going to utilize non-volatile solvents or no solvents, meaning they may be pressing, drying, doing some of the other processes that don't involve solvents. Alternatively, a level 2, they're going to use some pretty serious volatile solvents. We don't raise this and provide this information because we think it's going to create a danger. We want people to understand this is a pretty intense manufacturing process. And so it is not just your, people make concentrates in their home. We know that this is certainly beyond that scale. So because it is an industrial use, it's really only appropriately located in the industrial zones. And so these are the industrial zones in District 3. Again, you saw this slide previously, but we want to put it in the context of the manufacturing license type now. So again, considering the community considerations, some of these are going to be more key to manufacturing than others. Things like fees, to maintain that a license type is being compliant with a complex state law, such as definitions of use of solvents and all of that, we certainly will need to have some compliance interacting. So we would expect some fees for this license type, and enforcement we would have to make sure was in line, but we probably have less concern on odor and maybe even security, because that product is not, packaged and necessarily ready to be taken onto the black market. So again, same considerations, but each one carries different weight for different license types. Any questions on the manufacturing license type? Okay, again, we're picturing that in the product movement. It has to go to a distributor, and then it's going to go to that manufacturer. Though we think there is a method by which it can go directly from the cultivator to the manufacturer. All right, the next one is testing. We have had a lot of input both from citizens and I think from industry professionals who say this is one of the most key license types, because any product that makes it to a dispensary, any product that makes it to an end user, absolutely has to be tested and meet testing standards. So that makes this license type indispensable for anybody who's in the market. And so when the state developed this, it identified this business type as a lab, essentially, that will test all the cannabis and actually certify it. So it's a state-certified lab who's giving a certificate for resale or transfer prior to delivery to dispensaries or other businesses. Again, prior to that product getting to the store and the end user. The testing will be for cannabinoids, contaminants, microbiological impurities, and other compounds spelled out in state law. It is a complicated protocol. Again, it will have one set for medical and one set for adult use. And again, do I raise this? You guys are talking about dispensaries, but no product can get to you unless there's an approved testing lab that is able to turn that product around in a sufficient amount of time to really move that product to the end user. And so it's interesting that the state has created this whole marketplace, and as of now, we'll kind of see where that goes. Any questions on the testing business type? Okay. Again, there's a lot of details coming down in regulation, but as to the question of whether we want them, that gives you kind of a sense of what it does. The next one is distribution. It's the Amazon of cannabis, and so here in this picture, you can see Noah's Ark is actually back there. I don't expect distribution facilities to be quite that large, but it is a warehouse. It's a business that will regulate the flow of cannabis. So it will come into the distributor generally from the manufacturer in a packaged way, or from the cultivator in a raw but stable form, be confirmed and inspected that it is actually what it says it is, that it weighs what it says it weighs, that it is labeled pursuant to state law. Similar to Amazon, where a seller has a product that says these are, this is books packaged for sale and the address is to go to whatever. As it comes into Amazon, although the stakes are a little bit different, this business type will be to make sure that the integrity of that package is there, that it's meeting those protocols, and then it will move on to the next stage for inspection, and ultimately to the end user. So this is, again, an imperative license type to get a product from that cultivator ultimately to the end user. That's the distribution license type. Any questions? Okay. Transportation. These are the green blobs. Okay. We have a ton of transport businesses in San Joaquin County. We are a county that depends on ag as well as our location, which includes obviously major highways, and being centrally located to the Bay Area, to the Sierras, as far as north to south and south to north transport, we are key. Now, that's for existing products such as ag. Our Amazon facility is located to take advantage of those qualities. And so a licensed transporter here would have very similar benefits, but this is not your old school ag, harvest transporter. In fact, these would be approved under state law. They have to utilize non-marked vehicles, and in fact we would expect something like a Brinks truck, if not exactly a Brinks truck, or something like this, because obviously this is not grapes coming to harvest. They would also be expected and required to participate in the electronic shipping manifest system. So the state will actually be monitoring that. So if it's coming from my license type or my licensed business, I have to make sure it's getting to that transporter. They have to, chain of command, keep track of it, and then ultimately at the next point, the next business type, they'll be dropping that off and making sure that that manifest is being conveyed to the state electronically as well as physically. And that seems like kind of details that don't matter when you're thinking about the bigger question of whether we should or shouldn't have them. But I think that kind of information is very key for you guys to decide how you want to inform your board. Is this something that you value, that you think is like existing transporters, and therefore we are perfectly situated for it, or it is different than existing transporters, and that idea that it's carrying cannabis creates a problem or a security concern. So we think it's important that people know what this means. Any question on the transportation business types? You are excited about discussion. I know. Oh, yeah.
Wouldn't it be likely that a transport business would commercially be part of a larger transport business? Does lots of other because I can't see that there's enough going on that you would have a viable transportation business independent and on its own just for cannabis transport locally.
So, Kitty, you raise a really good point. When the state developed this license type, they didn't limit it necessarily to if I am allied trucking, I could, according to state law right now, it does not preclude allied trucking from becoming a licensed transporter anytime under the cannabis laws. With that license, anytime it's transporting cannabis, it is going to have to identify that truck, confirm that in fact it is non-marked, at least as far as transporting cannabis. So it could probably still say allied. The question is whether it could be marked to transport cannabis, and then they would have to track and transfer that product pursuant to all of the regulations for that license type. So even though this truck may be moving, grapes, and this truck may be moving for residential moves, this portion of the business, I think, could obtain a license. It could be part of a greater scheme. On the other hand, I don't think we know necessarily whether a transport business only for cannabis would or wouldn't exist until we see what the locals are approving. So if you have a swath of jurisdictions that are approving cultivation, there may be enough business bringing that product down to LA dispensaries. I don't know yet. I think it will depend on ultimately what the either regions or jurisdictions are approving to see what's happening where. And we have an industry professional who often comes and talks about the idea that we have large scale cultivation happening in Calaveras County, and we have huge sort of end user markets in the Bay Area, as an example. And under state law, a jurisdiction like San Joaquin County, even though we can say you can't be located here, transporter licensee, we cannot say transporter licensee who is licensed in Calaveras cannot drive through our jurisdiction. So that's what's interesting. I assume that larger companies like Allied, this is not a plug for Allied, could obtain a license and transport. I don't see anything in state law that precludes that, but it will ultimately depend on what the market develops to look like.
Right. I'm just thinking in this county, because of our transportation system, it's more likely that it would be an existing trucking company coming in and asking for that additional use.
That's a good point. And yes, I think that that's probably most likely. And that's an interesting question, right? Because one of what we're posing is there are impacts to this, whether we say yes or no, and there are opportunities if we say yes. And so is this an opportunity for the transport business, or is it somehow taking away from that the existing transport businesses providing services to the existing ag? Is it cheaper, faster, easier money to transport cannabis, and therefore I'm not gonna support my ag clients anymore? Or alternatively, is it an opportunity for existing? It's such a hard question, but you raise a really good point. So with the existing ones, could they continue their operations and sort of add to it and get a license? I would expect that to absolutely be, if it were approved, yes, that would be an option, an additional use, or we already have this business. Yeah, good question. It's complicated. It's a complicated issue. All right. So any other questions on transport? Okay, so now again, we're combining these logistic license type, and that's not a term that the state uses. That's the term that Mark and I came up with, because boy, this gets really complicated. And so imagine if you had discussion topics on every license type. And we see these as being similar. And so there's of course the threshold question. Should the county, Board of Supervisors, do you want us to draft a policy that says, we want you to permit the following businesses, or do you want them to prohibit the following businesses? Manufacturing, testing, distribution, and transportation. And if you say, board, we think you should approve them. First of all, why do you think that? And second of all, should they treat medical and adult use differently? And we will continue to ask that question because they continue to be separate under state law. There are some inklings from the state that some members at the state level do want to combine those systems, but right now they're separate, so we continue to ask that question. So we're going to open it up. Renee's got a mic. Ryan's trying to get out of this, but he's going to be over here in just a second. So let's get some comments on these logistic license types. What are your thoughts? Do you think if they don't exist in the county, would that negatively impact your business plan? Or do you think that that should be something that all exists here in San Joaquin County because that's going to allow your business to thrive? What are your thoughts? She just goes to you first. We've got a system.
Yeah, I definitely think it should be allowed. I think I'm pretty clear on that. So my answer again is yes, it should be allowed.
Good.
Yes.
Okay. So why?
I believe the financial impact that it would have is something that's going to be hard to say no to.
Why?
I think it's already been proven in other states that it raises a lot of money, taxes and
For who?
For the counties, for the cities, for the people, really.
Because some people say, and this is why I'm following up on this, because I think it's a really interesting question. Some people say, and you raised this, in a jurisdiction that only gives out a few licenses, who is making that money? Is that the community making that money, or is that the business owner? What do you think about that?
I think it should be the business owner, but of course he's going to be paying taxes.
So that's going to trickle down. You're going to see a positive benefit to the community.
Definitely.
Okay. You think they're going to spend that money locally?
They should, and there should be, laws put in place to kind of govern the money, I guess.
Okay. What do you think about jobs? You think these guys are going to provide jobs?
Definitely creating jobs. That's with any new industry, would be creating jobs.
Okay. So by opening, we have transport and we have distribution. So even though we're not really opening up a new distribution, we're opening up a new industry of cannabis. So we're sort of allowing new businesses to come, and you think there's going to be an economic benefit?
I think it's already been proven in other places that already have, that's already legalized it.
Okay, so we should be looking at Colorado, looking at Washington, and seeing if things like this are bringing dollars locally.
Correct.
Okay, and that could be a guide for us.
Definitely.
Okay. What are your guys' thoughts on logistic license types? Or any one in particular? I mean, you could comment just on testing or just on transport, but...
I mean, testing is a great thing for cannabis because there's a lot of chemicals that that people are putting in, or growing marijuana with. And I think that's beneficial for everybody because who wants to, and consume chemicals and...
Right, who wants contaminants?
Exactly.
Okay.
So I think that's very beneficial to have testing.
So in general, testing's important. Do you think that's a license type that you would like to see the board allow in District 3 or allow in the unincorporated county?
Yes.
Okay, because you think it's important for that end user.
Yeah, exactly, to be informed and know what he's actually consuming.
Okay, so our end users could potentially get a better product if we could make sure that testing facility is meeting those state requirements, meeting local requirements.
They're grown organically, and yeah.
Okay, interesting. Great. What about the others? What about manufacturing, distribution? You think there's a value in having that be local, or should that be not allowed here because it's cannabis and cannabis has negative impacts? What are your thoughts?
I think it should be accepted. I think there's nothing wrong with it. I mean, it's already sold in all the cannabis clubs. Why would it be a problem having it right here in our county done?
Okay. I appreciate that. What are your guys' thoughts?
Same.
No, okay, then I'll ask you a specific question. If you are opening a business here, do you think that it's going to help your business to have these located locally, or do you think it's going to hurt your business? Because one of the things I always convey this to the citizens is that our board ultimately has a range. They can, on this far right end, I chose right for a reason, they can expand the ban. Sort of the most conservative option on the spectrum could be the expanded ban, and they could continue that forward and not allow any cannabis businesses. Or alternatively, they can allow 1 or 3 or 5 of the various license types, and way over here on the left is the far other extreme where it could be an open market. Right, where they're only limited by the general plan locational criteria, but otherwise they're open. That's the full spectrum here. And so I ask because if you're thinking about maybe trying to get into a business of dispensaries, do you think your business is going to do better if they're allowing more business types? Because we haven't really had many people at these who are saying, this is what I'm interested in. We've had a cultivator, people who are in the industry, but you're really thinking about it. So I would be really interested to hear if you think your business would do better with the synergy of having different license types allowed. Or do you think your business is going to do the same either way?
Say it'd probably do better just because logistics and everything would just, I mean, it would be cheaper to run. Yeah, of course, if everything's local.
Okay, so it's going to be cheaper to run. You think maybe that's, I mean, that may be why we've got a lot of the ag processing. We have an ag lab kind of right here because we've got the ag product right here. So it may be cheaper as far as logistic costs.
Correct.
Okay. Any other reason you think it's going to be either better or worse? You think it's going to take your workers?
No, if anything, it'll bring more, maybe, well, it would have brought maybe more people in to work.
Okay,
just
so more
maybe
people
attract
interested in
more
the
people.
industry.
Yeah, attract more people in for more job, make more jobs.
Okay.
Yeah, I don't think it'll take workers away. I don't think it'll just add more people that are interested in this industry to get jobs in the industry.
What do you guys think? And then we'll kind of do some general questions. We're going to move on to the personal cultivation. But we have had some comments on the fact that if we open this up, potentially what happens is that industrial space, warehouse space, ag land, the price of those gets driven up. So people prospecting for those, so people who, I want to just have my pottery factory, and I try and go rent space, and now that costs 14 times more. Did I break another one? Oh, battery's going. I was like, I've gone through 3 mics tonight. That's awesome. Meeting 7 of 7. And they've said, so by driving up those real estate costs, it negatively affects businesses that want to go in. So your rent right now is one price, but as if we open it up as people prospect, your rent may be 3 times that much. Do you see that as a negative, or do you just see that as part of the cost of a new industry, part of the cost of doing business?
I think it's just part of the cost.
Okay. Okay. Any other thoughts on cannabis, commercial cannabis businesses? I think we got a resounding yes. And some interesting comments. Okay, thanks so much. So we're going to close up this section, and now 4 mics. All right, so that's like some kind of record. And now what we want to talk about is personal cannabis cultivation and reasonable regulation of that. So I'm going to hand it back over to Mark. Really appreciate you letting me quiz you and you guys answering a lot of tough questions.
Thank you. Thanks for participating. We really mean it. We really do appreciate the feedback. So the last area that we want to talk about is this idea of personal cannabis cultivation. We know under state law that anyone who's 21 and over is allowed to grow up to 6 plants in their residence. And state law defines residence as a single-family dwelling, an apartment, a mobile home. So they really open it wide open. We're looking from the Board of Supervisors perspective and those police powers I talked about earlier, health, safety, and welfare. And is there a role for the board in regulating in some manner that personal growth? So the board cannot ban personal cultivation in the private residence or enclosed accessory structure. The board could say, and we've heard other people say, well, you know what, the plants are healthier if you grow them outdoors. So board, you should allow people to grow their 6 plants in their backyard. Thoughts? Outdoor grow?
I think, yeah, absolutely.
So do you think that, so when we're dealing with land use issues, we always talk about land use disputes as not what happens in the middle of my property, but it's what happens at the boundary, because it's how I use my property that impacts how you use or cannot use your property that creates the dispute. In talking about odor and the potential for, because one of the discussions earlier, somebody mentioned these carbon filters that work great for limiting odor indoor. I don't know how effective they'd be for limiting odor outdoor. And I think that odor is a lot like music. Let me explain that. That's a weird connection, right? Music and odor. Wow, how did he get there? Okay, so here in Lodi, we've got a lot of wineries that have weddings starting about now through the end of September. So every weekend they've got these weddings booked. And right there next to the winery, you've got some homeowner who has no interest in the winery and they just want to enjoy their backyard. But you know, that wedding or that winery has outdoor amplified music. So every weekend, all weekend long, all summer long, they're hearing Proud Mary every night blasting over, and they can't enjoy their backyard because the music from those outdoor speakers doesn't respect property lines, just like odor doesn't respect property lines, right? You're not going to be able to, if you're growing it outdoors, you're not going to be able to control where that odor goes, especially if you're talking about in a residential neighborhood. So with that kind of in mind, does that change your thought about whether you should have outdoor grow in a residential neighborhood?
Such as county, there's a lot more land. We have a lot. County's a lot more open, and there's a lot more land, and a lot of people are far away from each other. I mean, I don't see anything wrong with growing in county. City, that's a different set of rules that should be applied, but county, I don't understand that.
Okay, so in the county, that's right. In the ag zones, there's quite a bit of distance between most residents, but you have a lot of there are areas within the county that are zoned residential. For instance, the Mountain House community outside of Tracy, that there's no agriculture, that is all residential zoning, and that is in the county. That's not in the city of Tracy.
Yes.
You have other areas, Lockford, Linden, some areas outside of Escalon where you have these smaller clusters of homes. It's a smaller residential setting. Neighbors closer together. So should we say, okay, if you're doing personal grow and you're in the ag zone and you've got maybe a minimum distance between you and your neighbor, outdoor cultivation is okay. But in
residential,
maybe not so much?
No, yeah. Because you're close, yes, because you're closer to your residents and people won't like that.
Right. I mean, that's the idea. And so that's part of what the board's going to have to deal with is where do we draw these lines at, if we draw them at all?
Hard question.
Yeah, that is. And that's why we're asking you guys, the experts. You know, and what do you think? Because it's not really a question about being an expert in the industry. You're an expert in how you want to use your property. You know, if we were talking about, the state had licensed the ability for everybody to keep domestic pigs, and I want to keep a domestic pig in my backyard, you may have an objection to that, right? Odor, there may be some odor that goes along with that. And so that's what I mean when I say that you're an expert. You're an expert in how you want to use your property, your residence, and how that can impact other people or how they can impact you.
Okay.
So any other thoughts on, we'll move this along a little bit?
Yeah.
Okay, so let's see. Same sort of concerns, odor, safety, indoor cultivation. What, in your all's interest of having a dispensary or a retail outlet, have you visited, are you familiar with indoor grows?
Yes.
What kinds of problems do you see with indoor grows that somebody might experience if they were growing in their home?
Maybe flooding your house.
Okay.
Electrical.
I'm sorry.
Do you mean gardening problems?
Well, things like we've heard things like mold. Flooding, things that would result from, somebody using extension cords for their sodium lights instead of having them properly wired. Those types of things.
Yes, I think you should have your room properly wired.
Okay.
From an electrician and professionally done.
Okay.
Not just extension cords running everywhere and
Yeah, especially not where it's going to flood, right?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So should for these personal grows, then, if they're going to be indoors, should the county require that people license them so that at least you can have that inspection to make sure, look, we're not running extension cords for your high power lamps?
I don't think that's going to work, because how many people are going to want to grow? There's not going to be enough inspectors to go inspect every single house.
Well, that's also an issue.
Yeah.
We had somebody who said that they should have a patch fee, a patch tax. So if you wanted to have your 6 plants, you'd pay a nominal, $25, or at least it'd be registered. Somebody come out and look at it and make sure that you're not running the extension cords through your hydroponics.
Correct. If you're doing on a bigger scale, I think, just a normal average person, I don't think that's going to be much of a problem if they're not growing, tons of plants. If you're doing on a bigger scale, I think, yes, it should be inspected and make sure it's properly put together.
Okay. Any other thoughts there? What about if you're renting the space? Because the law, state law, does define a residence as including an apartment. Should you have to get permission from the landlord before you can have that personal cultivation?
Yeah, you should.
Yeah, because especially if you're talking about flooding, right? Landlord might be a little upset. So that's an area where the board could put in a regulation if they decide to go there. Permits and fees, we talked about that. Property setbacks, there's already, in most residential areas, there are property setbacks if you're going to have an outdoor accessory structure. So if you've got a tough shed in your backyard, usually there's limits that say it must be a minimum of 10 feet from your property line, something like that. Do you think that if you're using that accessory shed for cultivation, should it be a greater distance from the property lines?
No, because you can control the smell in the shed.
Okay. Any questions on personal cultivation? All right, so the question that we're really asking is this. Would you like the county to consider establishing reasonable regulations around personal cannabis cultivation undertaken by you or your neighbors?
I think they should consider some, but it's medicine. When it comes down to it, it's medicine. I think everybody should have access to medicine without having to go through large loopholes or.
Okay. So everybody should be, if you're 21 or over, you should be able to grow it. There should be some regulations, sort of along the lines that we've discussed.
Pretty much.
Okay, sort of building safety, building code type regulations.
Exactly.
Security, if you've got it outside, using carbon filters to cut down on the odor, that type of thing, so you're not imposing on your neighbors.
Correct.
Okay.
No outdoors, like you have to be in a greenhouse structure.
I don't know, you're on the bubble there.
No open growth, just like it has to be in a greenhouse or in some kind of structure to control everything, not just out in the open.
Right, and so that was what we were talking about in the residential area. It needs to be in that accessory structure, something that's going to control that.
Yeah.
Perhaps in the ag zone, it could be, if there's a minimum distance or buffer zone between you and your neighbor, then it should be allowed.
Yes.
Open property line, yeah. It should
Okay.
definitely be allowed.
Okay.
Yeah.
All right. Any other comments on personal cannabis cultivation? All right. That's it. Thanks for participating. Thanks for coming out, taking the time, informing us, educating us, giving us this information that we can take back to the Board of Supervisors. Our goal is we're going to finish this collection of information by the 4th of July. I just picked that date because I thought it was a good one, an easy one to remember. So 4th of July, we're going to cut this off, consolidate all of the information. We're going to take it to the Board of Supervisors the afternoon of August 8th. So You know, aside from the various means of input on the website or email I think we've got some cards back there. So you're able to pick up the cards, you know how to get hold of us. The next meeting, if you're not coming to the industry meetings where you can come out and have some input, is at the Board of Supervisors meeting, which is in downtown Stockton, at the County Administration Building, which is over by the courthouse. The afternoon, so about 1:30 on August 8th. And if you want to come out and participate, that would be terrific. And we'll put that up on the website as well. So it'll be on our website, it'll be on our Facebook, it'll be every place that we can put that. And that's it. Thanks, guys, for coming out. We really appreciate it.